Perfect World Episode 216. When Sherhow accidentally arrived on the other side of the Borderland, in another world, he realized the cruelty of the creatures there. Previously on. When Sherhow saw the mother of all creation cauldron again and learned it came from the future, he was shocked and terrified. Because if his guess was true, what kind of changes in the future would cause this powerful being to come and talk to him? Sherhow still remembered his first encounter with this cauldron was beneath the Eternal Emperor's black abyss. Clearly, this wasn't its first time seeking help. If all of this was connected, it was hard for him not to imagine what had happened in the future. Sherhow even felt the future might be even more terrifying. The 9 heavens and 10 earths would fall into eternal darkness. At this moment, the cauldron moved again because the lightning above struck down once more. It was obviously caused by Sherhow's previous question. As the cauldron shook violently, emitting bursts of crimson light, it once again narrowly averted the crisis. Sherhow gasped and dared not speak again because he discovered the cauldron was also afraid of triggering a great calamity. Under these circumstances, Sherhow could only guess what had happened in the future. At this moment, his mind was not only on the future, but also on the previous era. If he were in the future, what would he want to do if he went back to the past? Sherhow thought for a long time. If he were to go back to the past, he would understand the enemy and figure out why the Immortal Valley era fell. Would there be a way to restrain those enemies? But why did this cauldron come from the future to ask him for help? Could it be that this era was also destroyed? A new era began in the future, and they wanted to come here to investigate. Thinking of this, Sherhow felt a wave of melancholy. Was the tragedy of the Immortal Valley era destined to repeat itself? This era had also failed, and all living beings had perished. Speaking of which, let me recommend a perk for you guys. If you're single and like to play, try the one in the bottom left corner. You can experience the style of a Japanese girlfriend, the charm of a Korean girlfriend, the reserved nature of an Eastern girlfriend. Whatever type you like, they have it all. Hundreds of girlfriends for you to choose from. No download required. Click the bottom left corner and give it a try. Meanwhile, the 3 supreme beings outside were doing everything they could to find Sherhow. This incident was too strange. They didn't expect a prodigy to mysteriously disappear from under everyone's noses. Even with the 3's exceptional divine stones and boundless magical power, it was to no avail. The 3 supreme beings even speculated that perhaps a being more powerful than them had forcibly taken Sherhow away. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to be completely unaware. After discussing it amongst themselves, they decided to take the others and leave this place and head to the Celestial Academy. But being one short made the 3 supreme beings feel somewhat guilty. Meanwhile, on the other side, Sherhow was still talking to himself, trying to communicate with the cauldron, trying to understand everything. But the cauldron no longer responded. Sherhow was also afraid of incurring great karmic consequences, so he ultimately couldn't communicate successfully. As for whether this cauldron came from the future, Sherhow had sufficient reason to believe it. Because there truly were powerful beings in this world who could interfere with the river of time. For example, Wu Zhongyu and the reincarnation Immortal King. When Sherhow's spirit wandered to the Immortal Valley, it was these 2 immortal kings who used their divine power to connect heaven and earth, allowing him to return to the past. Since someone had done it in the past, then such supreme powerful beings would definitely appear in the future. Sherhow sighed. Where will I be in the future? Could it be that I truly perished in this era? He gazed deeply at the cauldron from the future and then at the scattered white bones on the distant ground. All of this seemed to foreshadow the outcome of this era, filled with endless darkness, devoid of hope. Sherhow roared unwillingly, I don't believe I will perish. I will surely transcend and become immortal. I will slay all enemies of the past, present, and future. As soon as he spoke, the light atop the cauldron shone brilliantly, as if resonating with Sherhow's words. It seemed deeply joyful. Sherhow asked again, What are you trying to tell me? Suddenly, the cauldron transmitted a life's worth of words. I want to see you. Clearly, it had used its greatest power. In the vastness, it resisted a kind of power of rules to tell Sherhow the truth. But at this moment, endless lightning accompanied by immortal Tao aura surged violently in the sky. It was surging madly and violently. Sherhow could feel this lightning was too terrifying. Any single bolt was enough to pierce through a continent. If it were to happen in the 3,000 continents, it would be a complete catastrophe. As the lightning surged madly, the cauldron rushed upwards once more. It seemed to be severing the connection between the present and order. When all the immortal Tao lightning disappeared, the cauldron was visibly dimmer. The bloodstains on it were now extremely dark. Clearly, the cauldron had also paid a great price for this. And the reason for the appearance of this destructive power was entirely due to the conversation between Sherhow and the cauldron. It had affected the balance of this world. Sherhow knew they couldn't truly communicate yet. They could only confirm each other's conjectures. If they were to truly speak plainly, the consequences would be unimaginable. Because this cauldron came from the next era. Being able to come to this era, it had already borne immense karmic consequences. If it were to forcibly interfere with the events of this era, even if this cauldron was the greatest divine artifact of all time. Sherhow looked at the cauldron and sighed. You carried hope here, but in the end, you can't tell me everything, only leaving me to slowly guess. Although the cauldron had said it hoped to see him in that era, this piece of information couldn't decipher the essential things. Moreover, Sherhow had once seen a glimpse of the future, another him, desolate and alone. Everything ceased to exist. Was this his ending? If this cauldron came from the next era, it would probably have already understood this. However, the cauldron didn't admit it, nor did it deny it. It seemed to be analyzing something because the bloodstains on the cauldron were constantly glowing rhythmically. Sherhow looked at the cauldron, his heart unable to calm down. Could it be that after the end of this era, future generations wouldn't know? Or perhaps, after this era, where would he be? Would he perish, or would something else happen? Sherhow guessed that the events of the next era were very likely related to him. Otherwise, why would this cauldron come here? But he didn't want to accept reality because Sherhow had seen that glimpse of the future where all his friends and family were dead. The entire world had fallen into darkness. Then he said to the cauldron, I can change everything. That's not the future. That's not the ending. The cauldron shook violently, as if it understood Sherhow's words. It also seemed to be struggling against immense karmic consequences. Suddenly, it tore open the void and rushed into the distance, disappearing from Sherhow's sight. This startled Sherhow. The cauldron had brought him here, but it left without any hesitation. Sherhow sighed. He felt he was still not strong enough. If his strength were absolute, he could control everything. Forcibly keeping the cauldron would also be possible. However, Sherhow quickly understood. He guessed the meaning of the cauldron, saying it came too early. Perhaps it wasn't the current him that it wanted to see, but the most powerful him of the future. But the only thing that worried Sherhow now was how he would return to the wasteland region. Sherhow's divine sense was sharp. He knew that the passage through the strange space was most likely still in the wasteland region. As expected, when Sherhow arrived at a spatial battlefield, although the cauldron had left, the crack was still there. Without a second thought, Sherhow rushed in because he knew the cauldron wouldn't harm him. If there were danger, it wouldn't have left a way back for him. And the cauldron could probably only do this much. If it were to forcibly intervene, it would most likely incur indestructible karmic consequences. A moment later, Sherhow appeared in a world filled with the songs of birds and fragrant flowers. This scene was completely different from what he had imagined. This was no longer a desolate wasteland. There was only vibrant life. Sherhow was puzzled. What kind of place had he come to? The contrast was too great. One second he was on an ancient battlefield, and now he was in a pure land. Sherhow looked back. The crack behind him had disappeared. Could this place be a spatial node? Sherhow felt that he had to remember this place. If he wanted to go back, he might still need it. Sherhow walked forward quickly. He didn't fly because he felt this world was unusual. It was as if a great Tao had descended, putting immense pressure on him. But suddenly, a small bird transformed into a green light and rushed towards Sherhow at high speed. Sherhow simply waved his hand. A metallic sound resonated from his fingertips, clanging. Sherhow was shocked. It was just a palm-sized bird, yet it had such a hard body. It was unbelievable. The little bird quickly flew away like a phantom, landing on a mountain peak. It stared intently at Sherhow. Sherhow quickly opened his heavenly eye and gazed carefully. He immediately gasped because this creature didn't belong to the 3,000 Dao provinces. It had a strange appearance. Its beak curved like a true dragon's, and there were faint skull patterns on its feathers. Sherhow couldn't believe it. This was actually a death dragonbill bird. Although it was already extinct in reality, he had seen this demonic creature in ancient books. Legend had it that in the previous era, this bird was a powerful race, small in size but terrifyingly powerful overall. Sherhow was a little confused. Where exactly had he come to? How could he encounter such a creature? As far as he knew, the laws of heaven and earth in this era had already greatly changed. Creatures from the primordial era couldn't adapt, and most of them had disappeared in the long river of time. But now, this overturned Sherhow's understanding. This death dragonbill bird was clearly alive and well, and outrageously powerful. However, Sherhow also noticed that its eyes were red. They flickered with a strange light, very different from the emerald green described in the ancient books. At the same time, Sherhow also thought of the battle in the Immortal Valley era. The mysterious invaders back then also had blood-red eyes, as if they were demonized. Thinking of this, Sherhow was a little terrified. He wondered if he had arrived at the world on the other side of the Borderland. If it were true, it would be absolutely shocking. However, Sherhow felt that it wasn't realistic. The Borderland was difficult to penetrate. How could he possibly end up here? But then Sherhow remembered that the cauldron had the power to contend with fate. Bringing him here wasn't impossible. Just then, the death dragonbill bird turned and attacked Sherhow. Its beak glowed, shooting out dragon-shaped blades of light. If an ordinary celestial god were hit, they would probably die there. But Sherhow was fearless. He simply used the Kuan Pum technique to suppress the bird. Then, just as Sherhow asked where he was, the bird's eyes dimmed. Its body began to rot and instantly turned to ashes. In that instant, it was as if it had experienced eons, until its body and spirit were completely extinguished. In the end, Sherhow could only continue exploring, hoping to find out what kind of place this was. But this area was very strange. All the living ferocious birds and beasts had crimson eyes. Once suppressed, they would immediately turn to dust. Although Sherhow realized he had arrived on the other side of the Borderland, he still wanted to confirm it. He wanted to know what the enemies looked like. What was their origin? Then, Sherhow left this place. When he soared into the air, he discovered the laws of heaven and earth here were unusual. They seemed to be suppressing him, completely different from the 3,000 Dao provinces. But based on this alone, Sherhow still couldn't be sure that he had crossed the Borderland. Then, he arrived at a purple mountain peak. This place was exceptionally rich in spiritual energy. The surrounding pools were formed from spiritual liquid, and there were many unheard of sacred medicines and divine medicines, emitting a fragrant medicinal aroma. Sherhow wondered if he had stumbled into some powerful being's medicinal garden. As expected, when Sherhow infiltrated this purple mountain, he saw a golden ginseng as thick as an arm. It was golden and translucent, flowing with sacred light. It looked like a large radish. Sherhow immediately thought of the tiny jade rabbit because the little rabbit's favorite thing to gnaw on was sacred ginseng. Sherhow easily pulled out the golden ginseng. A rich aroma filled the air, making his body feel exceptionally comfortable. However, the next moment, Sherhow immediately threw away the golden ginseng. He was disgusted by his own actions because he discovered that beneath the soil, a corpse was buried. Even after countless years, the bones were still intact. The flesh hadn't dried up. Clearly, this was a supreme expert from the primordial era. This golden ginseng had taken root in the corpse and grown from it. Sherhow felt this place was very strange. Sacred medicines usually grew in places with abundant spiritual energy. Why would it take root in a corpse? The only fortunate thing was that he hadn't eaten it randomly. Otherwise, he would have vomited out everything he had ever eaten. Sherhow continued walking forward. He saw sacred medicine after sacred medicine. He recognized most of the sacred medicines there, but some he had never seen before. At least, they were already extinct in the 3,000 Dao provinces. Sherhow observed carefully. He guessed that some of the sacred medicine species were probably sacred medicines that had already gone extinct in the Immortal Valley era. But why were they still here? And preserved until now? Sherhow became more and more convinced that he might very well have arrived on the other side of the world. Sherhow quickly struck out with his palm. When the mountain crumbled, he immediately froze. The places where the sacred medicines grew were full of ancient corpses. And Sherhow also discovered that these corpses hadn't just nurtured one batch. The sacred medicines had been repeatedly utilized. Sherhow carefully observed these ancient corpses. He immediately clenched his fists because he discovered that these ancient corpses were all people from the 3,000 Dao provinces. Clearly, they had been captured by the creatures here, ultimately becoming nourishment for the sacred medicines. How cruel was this? They were originally powerful beings, yet they met such a tragic end. Sherhow then left this purple mountain area. He entered a vast plain and mountain range once more. When Sherhow struck down with his palm, his guess was once again confirmed. Even beneath ordinary mountains were the bones of powerful beings from the 3,000 Dao provinces. Sherhow's pupils constricted. Killing intent surged. Finally, Sherhow left this place. He wanted to find a nearby city to see what kind of creatures live there. Please give us a like and subscribe, fellow Daoists. Let's continue our chat in the next episode.